But if you're in the field, you spend a lot of time waiting. But then you need to be on when there's the short bursts of action. So you cannot possibly make a realistic movie and have it and this being entertaining, because it's like watching paint dry. And by the time you're asleep, something will explode. It says, "What happened?"
Since you've obviously came out on that, has all the reaction been quite positive, or have you had some negative sort of like feedback and stuff?
Well, I haven't heard from the Russians, but as far as negative reactions, I had just one. Well, I wasn't. That was early on, after my book got released. When I gave a presentation someplace in Pennsylvania, and some lady was very hostile, asking, "So why the heck are you not in jail?" I mean, it was like the tone. The question is legit, but that was the only one. Everything else is at worst neutral, but some people just don't care, which is fine.
Yeah.
But the reaction is phenomenally positive, because I'm so aggressively pro-American these days, and that's not that's not a show I'm put on. Because a German friend of mine reminded me once. He said, "There's a famous line from written by a German poet or something like that, and it goes like, he whose bread I eat, whose song I sing." And I said to him, "No, I would sing the song, and I don't get much bread anyway."
What was it like growing up in East Germany? Because we're obviously in England, we were obviously more in favour of the West and things like that. East Germany, to us, what we see on documentaries and stuff, that looks like a bit of a harsh life to come from before America.
Yeah, I just went through yesterday through a bunch of pictures in succession to remind me what it was like. So I grew up in a small village in an area of Germany that was traditionally poor. And it was just about 70 miles northeast of the city of Dresden, which was totally destroyed in World War II. And so, but I grew up in the country there, and just on the border with Poland, and we were all poor. We just didn't know it. There's a picture that is really terrible. That in that picture, I'm 12 years old, I believe, and I am thin as a rail. And I shared that once with an old friend of mine in Germany. And he said to me, "What, don't you know that we were called potato babies?" I said, "What do you mean by potato babies?" "Well, because most of our nutrition came from potatoes. So we didn't have enough protein. As a matter of fact, I was sick a lot. And, to me, being sick was like normal. And I was not allowed to play sports because my heart, my internal organs hadn't kept up with that growth, the vertical growth. I had a hard time learning how to swim because I couldn't breathe. It all settled. So by the time I went to high school, I was 14. The food became better. There were proteins available, and meat on Saturday. No, Sunday. Soup was Saturday. And I finally, became comfortable with my physicality. So I became a halfway decent athlete. I actually, in the last grade I got in phys ed was an A. So I caught up. All right, but go ahead.
Oh no, I was saying it must have been tough though, because like from an English point of view, we know about the World War, how it started during the war, but there's very, very little known what happened to Germany just after the war. Do you know what I mean? Them years after the war, it just seems to be a bit of a blank in a lot of people's history. So because people just forget, a lot of the people in Germany weren't for the Nazi regime and things like that, were they? They were just sort of there, and everyone just got caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, but you got to blame the German people for allowing Hitler to come to power.
Yeah.
I think, let me see if I remember this quote. I forgot who said that, but it goes like, the only way for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a paraphrase, but that's what happened. I it's probably understandable that I did a lot of research into the history of Germany and how it came that the guy who looked like a clown, this Hitler guy, got to power in a country that at a time may have been the most advanced with regard to the sciences and and the arts in the world. And it's just because people were passive, okay, and then they were in denial. Like you would have asked, ordinary Germans after the end of the war if they ever knew about concentration camps. No, nobody knew anything. Even the ones that were like only 10 miles, lived 10 miles away from one of those concentration camps, they were in denial. And quite frankly, in East Germany, the communists that were eventually becoming the unchallenged rulers dealt with the Nazi history very aggressively. For instance, in the school system, anybody who had been a member of the Nazi party or somehow was known to have fully cooperated with the Nazis was fired. That's how my parents became teachers. My father was 28, 45, 30, 15, 18 years old. He had almost finished high school. That was at the end of the war. And my mother actually had finished high school. They were recruited and went through like 6 month high intensity training to become teachers. And a lot of the teachers that I had were all new ones. And some of them weren't academically that good, but there were no Nazis, none. So that doesn't mean that the communists were good. They were just the evil people on the other side. Yeah. They were fighting the Nazis. The Communist Party was the only organization that would go out and fight the brown shirts in the streets at a time when the Nazis were not yet in power. Had they won then, I don't know what the result would have been. It certainly wouldn't have attacked the Soviet Union, but the oppression of its own people would have been very similar. Maybe the you can't speculate much, but neither extreme is preferable. They're both bad.
Ideally, you want something in the middle, don't you? Like, because there was like communism and capitalism. In my mind, I like aspects of both, like socialism looking after workers, but it's too far. And capitalism, you've got to have that happy medium, but I'd probably lean a little bit more towards capitalism. But everyone has a different philosophy on it. But when you look at history and things like that, it just, communism doesn't seem to work.
No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, you point to me one communist country in the history, one country that actually implemented communism the way it was laid out by Karl Marx and Engels, that didn't become a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Every one of them did. And it had something to do with if you centralize everything, eventually that pyramid will go bad, because there are going to be bad people getting to the top.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And in communist countries, you take Cuba, you take the Soviet Union, East Germany, the communist leaders actually wound up killing one another. The purges under Stalin were tremendous. I mean, he at one point in 1937, 38, he had a purge going on that wound up executing about 2 million people, and a lot of them were party members.
Yeah,
and half the Central Committee got killed. So that certainly doesn't work economically. It doesn't work because there was no communist and no collectivist kind of nation that could compete with raw capitalism. The concern that I have with capitalism, which is getting stronger is it's not regulated well. And the rule makers are now more or less the ones that are in power, and they make rules that only they understand, and they're good for them. So we don't have the checks and balances the way they were better 50 years ago. So that's my concern. We need to find a way, and if we didn't have a political class that was entrenched in and is only interested in staying in power, if we had the same setup that the United States has when it was first founded, that the government, the people that were elected would go to DC for 3 months and do what they had to do, then they go home and do what they normally do in real life. So if something like this could be reestablished, I think the capitalist system would work really well.
Did you ever think as a young lad in East Germany you'd ever be in the military, obviously as a spy or anything like that when you were a youngster?
No.
Did you ever think, like, I know if people have dreams of being a footballer or being in the military and stuff like that, was that anything you ever thought would happen to you?
No, I didn't have big dreams, period. Even when it came to deciding what I should study in college, I had no passion for anything. I knew I liked a lot of things. I liked the arts. I liked sports. I was pretty good in music, but my outstanding abilities were sort of in the realm of thinking. So eventually, it was almost by default. I said, "Yeah, okay, I'm going to study chemistry." And at that point, the only dream that I ever had was to become a tenured professor. That was because you know that better than the Americans. Tenured professors are not as wide, they're not as many in Europe as there are in the United States. If you are a tenured professor, you're part of the elite. All right, you're well paid and you're highly regarded. That's what I wanted to be. Never had even an inkling of a thought that I would want to be a spy or that I would qualify to becoming a spy. And so when I was initially approached by the KGB, that was a surprise. And one of my very well-developed character traits is curiosity. So when they came to me and said, "Well, why don't we develop a relationship?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." I wanted to find out what's it all about. I really, even at that point, I was just playing around. I wasn't really thinking this through and saying, "Well, hey, if I start talking with them, eventually I have to do this, this, and this." No, that eventually became more of a reality when I was asked point blank by who was probably the head of the KGB in East Germany, in Berlin, when he asked when I had a meeting with him, and his sole purpose was to nail me down. And in the middle of a conversation, he said, "Okay, so I want to know, are you in or not?" I was not prepared for that question, so I stalled, and I came up with a bunch of things that I'm not trained. I don't know. I know some things, but I need to learn a whole lot more. He cut me off. He said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of that. I just need to know if you're in or not. And we don't like people who take a long time to make up their mind. So you got until noon tomorrow."
Did when you get offered to be a spy, did they offer you like a contract or anything like that, money wise? This is how much you'll make. This is how long the contract will be.
This is really totally bizarre. There was nothing ever in writing. It was all verbal. When they told me how much money they would be paying me, that was a little more than I was already an assistant professor at the time at the university. It was a little more than I was making as an assistant professor. And the only thing I ever signed, believe it or not, the only thing I ever signed was a promise to never, ever share the algorithm that I was given to encrypt and decrypt messages, nothing else. And and it didn't bother me. Just like I trusted them. It was just pretty blind trust, but it was based on the fact that I knew this was, which was completely false knowledge, but based on the propaganda that we had been subject to, I knew that the KGB was just to be trusted. It was one of the best, the most noble organizations ever. That's what I thought, and so that's all. Everything else was nothing but verbal. And I just wanted to add, I was never considered an employee. It wasn't spoken out loud, but I didn't get a rank. If Russians who joined the KGB got a rank, and then they were even promoted to higher ranks and so forth, I had no rank. I had no serial number. And so I think I just was an independent contractor.
Did we, like, you wouldn't have been allowed to tell anyone, will you, or things like that? Were you allowed to tell family or anyone, or did you just have to say, I'm working for the government now, and you're not allowed to say what capacity, or were you allowed to tell?
Oh no, it's not. See, the moment I said yes, not that moment. Then it took about 6 weeks for me to disentangle myself from the university. I had to quit the job, and that had to be done not the regular way, because they would you can't just quit. And in East Germany, you quit, so there's no other jobs for you. You are where you are. So that had to be done through the university party organization, and the fellow who handled that was not a novice. When I went to his office to hand in my party document, which was a requirement, he looked at me and he said, thank you for what you're doing. We know that I know that most of us will never know the contributions that you will be making. He knew, but that was it. Everything else, my cover story when I went from the city where I studied and worked to go to Berlin for training, my cover story was that I would join the foreign ministry, the State Department, and become a diplomat. I didn't even get a piece of paper to show people. When I told my mother, she went like, huh? And luckily, when I disclosed my change from the university to the State Department, my brother was present, because the next thing after she said, "Are you a spy?" She was onto something, and my brother saved the day. He said, "Nah, he's not. He wouldn't do something like that." Case closed. So she then believed, and everybody else that I had to say goodbye to, I was just telling the same story, and they all believed it. Nobody questioned it openly. And there may have been some people. I think my best friend in college, and still my best German friend, period, he knew that I was lying, but he was as hardcore a communist as I was, and he already had an unofficial relationship with the Stasi, so the East German intelligence agency, and he wound up as an employee of the Stasi as a scientist. So he sort of knew. He didn't know any details, but he knew that I wasn't going to be a diplomat.
When you start training for being a spy, like we've got James Bond in England, obviously that is just Hollywood and things like that, but they give you like how he goes into training, people who are working under him and things like that. What's being a spy really like, the training for it? And how many years is it?
You can ask anybody, not just me. I have a lot of friends nowadays who are retired from the espionage game, FBI, CIA, NSA. I even know somebody from the FSB, and a couple of other intelligence services. They will all tell you the same thing. It can get very boring. So 90% if you're in the field, there's the analysts, they just never move from their desk. Their life is rather, it's like it's a desk job. But if you're in the field, you spend a lot of time waiting. But then you need to be on when there's the short bursts of action. So you cannot possibly make a realistic movie and have it and this being entertaining, because it's like watching paint dry. And by the time you're asleep, something will explode. You say, what happened?
Yeah.
So no, nothing like it. And for instance, unlike the CIA, which had and still has people in classes, they train together. My training was one-on-one.
Was that in Germany, or did you go to Russia for your training?
Yes, and I spent two years in Moscow to the extent it was possible to perfect my American brand of English. I had a tutor in Moscow who was trusted by the KGB. They didn't have somebody like that in East Germany. And, I spent 2 years with her one-on-one. I forgot whether it was once a week or twice a week. I think it was twice a week, about an hour and a half. But everything was one-on-one, with a minor exception that when some of the technical stuff, they didn't have, the technicians, they didn't have somebody who spoke either German or English. So I had my handler, my liaison, be present to do the translation. But everything, and I was going to say a while ago that the moment I signed up, the moment I said yes, and then I corrected myself. The moment I went and took my suitcase and moved north to Berlin, I became a Soviet/East German state secret. I mean, we were, our identity was extremely well protected. So when I interacted with other KGB folks, and they were mostly the employees that were Russians, we used cover names to address each other. And I have reason to believe that the individual in Moscow Center who made decisions about me, about my tasks, about what to do next, and so forth, never met me personally. He didn't have to.
Yeah.
Right. All he needed to know. So this is the guy you are leading. He has this is his personality. This is a history. Here's a bunch of documents that we wrote up when we met him, and then you decide what to do with him. And so the KGB was excellent, and this is confirmed by FBI and others who know this business. Excellent in compartmentalizing, so that traitors, if they wanted to betray somebody, would have a hard time to even give away one, as opposed to, and here's the radical opposite. In the United States, the CIA and the FBI were horrible, and still are in this respect. Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen would not have happened in the KGB. I mean, Aldrich Ames gave away the names of dozens of active agents, and a lot of them were executed. So, the KGB made a lot of mistakes, but with regard to keeping things secret, they were first rate.
Well, I knew that because there was a drug cartel in Mexico, and they copied the Russian style. So the pilot only knew the person picking up, the person who picking up. They didn't know anyone. So when they got caught, it couldn't say, like, they'd never met anyone apart from the person they dealt with. And they said it was like they copied it from the KGB or something like that. And that was basically their idea. So you couldn't go further up the chain. You could only grasp the one person up that they knew.
And the roots of that? That was in the old days when the communist parties had to go underground, like in Russia. and when the Nazis came to power in Germany, they had underground groups that were also connecting with one another. But it was, I think the rule was you cannot know more than two other people that are engaged in the same stuff that you're engaged in, but they belong to a different cell.
What was it like in Russia? I went to Russia 2 years ago, and
No.
I thought it was great. The Kremlin, the square, and things like that. But there wasn't many English-speaking people. I can remember being in bars and things, and my voice was the only, me and my missus were the only voice I could hear that was English. What was it like for a German in Russia? Because obviously the war had been like, I know it was previous, but was there any friction there still?
Not that I'm aware of, but I didn't socialize with ordinary Russians.
Right.
I didn't go to Moscow to learn Russian and become friends with a bunch of Russians. So almost all the interaction I had, with one or two exceptions, was with KGB employees. With regard to Moscow, the facade was pretty even then. You know, the Red Square, that church, I forgot what it's called, that's near the Red Square, and some of the big avenues, tree lined with these massive buildings left and right, was very impressive. But when you actually got out of the bus and you walked behind those big buildings, it was mud.
Yeah.
There was no grass. It was not well maintained. The elevators didn't work. I lived in one of those things, and there was sloppiness all over the place. And with regard to buying, I had to buy my own food pretty much. I took care of my own sustenance. Breakfast, lunch, I would try to find a good restaurant, which wasn't easy because the real good restaurants were only for people with Western currency.
Yeah.
But the hypocrisy, right, and that this shows. But so and dinner, I ate lots of bread, and in the supermarkets, what was always available was canned fish and mineral water. Everything else was, when you saw a line in front of a store, you just got in line. You didn't even ask what they got. Because whatever it was, if you don't want it, somebody else will.
Yeah. When you were doing your training, did you know you were going to get positioned in America? Was that the only place you knew right from the start?
No. It was quite obvious that they wanted to send me to West Germany. Sidebar: the Stasi had about 1,000 illegal agents in West Germany. Why would the Soviets want their own? That means it was proof that they didn't trust each other.
Yeah.
Right. So no, I was one of the first. When I first started in Berlin, I got two documents to read. One was a book, and the other one was a booklet. The booklet was the Constitution of West Germany. So, duh. And the book was the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. I had to study that. but so no, I was clearly, the direction was West Germany, which sort of made sense from a point of view of smuggling somebody in. There's very few cultural differences and minor language differences, but you can, in those days there were East Germans fleeing still, and I could have wound up in West Germany and nobody would have been the wiser. but here's the, maybe not an and, but it's an and. One of the requirements of my training was to learn a foreign language. A foreign language that was spoken in Western countries. I was given a choice between like English, French, and Spanish. And since I was really good in English in high school, I mean, I never studied this. It was so easy for me. I said, well, why don't we do English? And so there we go. And they paid for a tutor. I started pretty much from scratch, but it took maybe 8-9 months of intense studying, I really threw myself into this with all I had. I was at a point where I was passively fluent. In other words, I could take a book, an English novel, and read it.
Yeah.
And so one day I had a visitor from Moscow Center that was just, and we had a chat. How's it going? And by the way, how's your English? And I pulled a book from a shelf, and I said, I can read that. And the guy said, whoa. And then they made provisions to send me a tape recorder, and they told me, just say something, what freeform, whatever you wanted to say. So I did that, and within a week I was on a plane to Moscow. Somebody had an idea that they just found a rather special individual. So I had an interview with the person who eventually became my tutor in Moscow, and a professor from from Moscow University, that was her cover. She was really KGB. And so we just talked for whatever, 45 minutes, an hour. And then the two ladies were asked by the bosses, will he be able to or not? Able to what? Well, pretend, learn English well enough to pretend to have been born in the United States. The Russians said no. The Americans said, I think he could. Bingo. So they figured, give it a try. And that extended my training. I was pretty much finished with regard to operational training. I was ready to go to West Germany. I got a 2.5 years extra training, which not only language-wise, but I also, the operational training in Moscow was much better than what I got in Berlin. So,
how did you end up going to America from Moscow? Because I can't imagine that you'll just get a flight straight from Moscow to America, because that just looks a bit suspect, doesn't it? Is there ways around it, and changing a passport and things like that, and identity, I'm assuming?
You're onto something that direct flights were absolutely a no-no.
Yeah.
And counterintelligence should never be able to trace where you came from. And this was most important on my first trip from Moscow to eventually New York. Because when I got to the United States, my whole story was going to be, I was always here, right? So how do you do that? So it was a rather elaborate trip from Moscow to Belgrade on a plane, from Belgrade to Vienna by train. In Vienna, I left Moscow with a West German passport, obviously forged. In Vienna, I met an agent, the KGB agent, and he gave me a different West German passport, and I gave him the other one back. And then another train to Rome, where I met yet another agent, and he handed me a Canadian passport. By the way, that's the only name that I used that I still remember. I traveled as William Dyson, a resident of Toronto. The reason I remember it, because that was the passport with which I entered the United States. And once I was in the US, within 2 days, I killed William Dyson and became Jack Barsky. How did I do it? Because I had in my luggage in a secret compartment a bona fide birth certificate for Jack Barsky. And in those days, there was so much freedom in the US as far as travel and getting hotels. I mean, you could register at a hotel and you just write in your name, if it's, Joe Miller, it doesn't matter. You could get on a plane without showing ID. And I was then able, once I was, so just to answer the question, this is how we made sure that there's no way that Jack Barsky could ever be traced back to Moscow, right? And so every 2 years, I would go back to Moscow and Germany for a little bit, there was never a direct flight. There was always at least one other country in between. Typically, these were sort of neutral countries: Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, countries where the KGB would operate relatively freely, because in each one of those situations, I would meet another agent. So I would use a passport that a different passport to enter the Soviet Union. So even airlines wouldn't know. They keep a log as to who was the passenger. Airlines wouldn't know that I actually wound up in Moscow. So it's a long answer, but that was very important because if there's any way to trace me back at least a little bit and say that this guy is doing some really weird travel, I would have been busted.
Did you ever get nervous going through with a fake passport? Because I don't only speak from my point of view. I think I'd be like sweating, thinking, "Oh, they're on to me. That guy's looking at me. There's a guy with a dog over there." And in your position, if you get caught in America as a Russian spy, they're not going to pat you on the back. It's not going to be throwing a party for you. So was there any paranoia at any point when you were traveling?
Tense.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the tensest moment was when I got off the plane in Chicago and then went to customs and border control, and I was concerned with having to talk with an agent, having some kind of an interview. Tense, not nervous. I wasn't sweating, I wasn't shaking, but I was sort of numb. And what I did in situations like that, there was really there were a couple of questions, and I just gave very short answers, and they waved me right through. After a while, this border crossing became sort of routine.
Yeah.
Because I knew it worked. And, and to me, the most dangerous moment was, pretending to be a Canadian in the United States because I didn't have a Canadian accent. Right? Canadians talk differently from Americans. So, and I also traveled light, and I'd come in to Chicago from Mexico City, and my luggage didn't look like the luggage of somebody who was having a good time in Mexico. And I also had a shortwave radio in my luggage, which was a legit radio. You can buy it in the store, but if some really alert individual at customs, they did go through my luggage, had an idea, saying, well, let's talk to this fellow a little more. So I was worried about that, but there was one other moment that was as tense, and that was my interview with the Social Security Administration. These two were where I was tense. Other than that, I did all right. I'm a stoic. I just don't get very emotional when it comes to stuff that happens or that could happen.
With the Social Security, I don't know how it works in America. I think in England it's like a passport or out like that. Were you nervous because they ask you a lot of different questions, don't they? That like you'd have to have the answers to.
I had to, when I applied for Social Security, there was a requirement. You actually had to go into the office for an interview. All right. Because I was, at the time, I was already, according to my birth certificate, I was already like 33 years old. And that was not, it was unusual, but also possible, because there were some workers that were exempt from Social Security at the time, like farm workers and employees of churches and religious organizations. But I had to go and answer questions, and I was prepared. I prepared myself for any question that I figured they could throw at me. What really did the trick, though, I dumbed myself down. My cover story was that I had spent the preceding 10 years on a farm. So I dumbed myself down. I didn't really comb my hair. I rubbed soap in the eyes so they would look red. And so I really looked like a country boy. And so there were not too many questions. And I like question number one. So you never had a social security card? No. Why not? Well, I didn't need one. I didn't even explain why I didn't need one, because that would have been too much. I didn't need one. Okay, all right. And that was the end of it.
Right, right.
No, she did ask, and so did you work? Yes, where? Oh, I worked on Miller's Farm, upstate New York. And this was the third question. And once at that point she knew, yeah, I was exempt. So now that I'm in New York, I need a social security card. Well, let's give it to him. I still have the same social security number, by the way.
Did you find it easy adapting to American life? Because coming from East Germany, that must have been a big culture shock. And you're going from like the food you were saying in Moscow and stuff like that to Burger Kings and things like that in America. That must have been a bit of a culture shock.
Not a big shock, but I wasn't really well prepared. If for a good 2 years, I was very, very careful. I was aware that I really didn't know much about what it's like to live as an American. The KGB was not able to really give me any insights, and the lady that was my tutor had been out of the United States for a long time, so our knowledge was not up to date. There's a lot of mistakes, small mistakes that you can make that are a giveaway that you're really not an American. The only thing that they taught me was that when Americans eat, which is not the case anymore today, but when Americans eat, so they have the knife in the right hand and the fork in the left hand, and then they cut the meat and then they put the knife down and the fork because they're dumb enough they can't eat with both of them at the same time.
Right.
That was still true, but I was on a practice trip to Canada before I went to the U.S., and there I made a really interesting mistake. I I went to a restaurant and had some pizza and ordered a beer, and that beer came in bottles. And so I asked the waiter for a bottle opener, and he looked at me like, huh? So he took the bottle and he twisted the top off. We didn't have those.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are many other mistakes that you can make. And so I was lucky in that A, I was very careful, and B, my first job, I happened to become a messenger and work for 2 years as a full-time messenger. I carried stuff on a bicycle, which paid well enough, much better than what the foot messengers got. They had minimum wage, but there were always times when there was nothing to do. You sit in the office and you just listen and you just watch, you observe. I have excellent observation skills. I didn't know that. I just knew and then I had, by the time I entered life as a professional, I also had another 3 years at a college behind me. So at that point, it was next to impossible to even think that I'm not real. I had, and I still have it, a trace of an accent, but that was so easy to explain because, I had a stock answer. So, you sound like a European. I don't know, it's maybe Dutch. I says, yeah, I know, it's German. I grew up bilingual. My mother's maiden name was Schwartz. She was German. And the story in New York that flies is. So there's only one fellow who became a good friend of mine, who once, and that was already in my, I was already in the US for a dozen years. He one time came into my office. I was a director at Prudential. He closed the door and he said, "Hey, Jack, I've been wondering about you. There's something with you as a person that sort of doesn't all fit together. I'm wondering one day you may want to tell me." And then he went, and that was it. So that's the only fellow. There was nobody else.
Were you ever paranoid about like your phones being tapped or anything like that? When you first got there, did the paranoia get less and less the more years you were there? Or were you still alert?
No. That was not an issue. So here's the thing. I particularly early on, I went on surveillance detection routes on a regular basis to make sure that nobody's following me. And since I was extremely well trained, when I determined nobody was following me, I felt safe. And also I put some things. I arranged some things in my apartment that if somebody were to actually search the apartment, they would be disturbed. They were, and it's not the hair over the door. It's some things that. I give you one example. I had a chest of drawers, and the top drawer, there was an overhang. So in other words, you wouldn't quite it would look the same when the drawer was slightly open or totally closed. The only way you see the difference is if you look at it from below. So if somebody opened this drawer and then put it back, I left it 8 millimeters open. Things like that. So I was never worried that I was actually under observation, and that was actually the truth. Nobody in counterintelligence had a clue until the defector from the KGB gave him my name.
And you got like what is it called, a red alert or something like that, where you got told danger or something like that.
So, okay, so there were two events. There was one event that spooked them, and it didn't spook me because I was able to determine that this was actually a break-in. In 1986, there was a break-in into my apartment. People stole a stereo and ate a cup of yogurt and threw it half-eaten on the floor. And it was like unpleasant, but I did, counterintelligence measures. I went on my surveillance route. I wrote myself a letter from a fictitious address that was not entirely sealed. So in other words, when the letters are opened mechanically by machines, so when they get closed again, there is no more not moistened spot in the seal. Okay, and I also saw that at least one of the markers that I said wasn't disturbed. So to me that was a break-in, and I was right. The center almost wanted to keep me back when I told him about this in Moscow, but I convinced him that no, I'd be okay. In 1988, and I know this now in hindsight because I met a fellow who was also an illegal, also in New York, at the same time. I met him many years later in Germany. 1988, something spooked the KGB. FBI, we don't have a clue what that was, but they had reasons to believe that somebody gave up my friends and my name, and that we were about to get busted. And to just make a long story short, it was not true.
Right.
And the reason that they figured out it wasn't true, they said my friend went back to Moscow, and he stayed there for a couple of months, and then they said, false alarm, you can go back.
Right,
okay.
right.
So in my case was different, talking a red alert. We had a set of signals for very basic, to transmit basic information, such as I would always set a signal when I was back in New York. These were predetermined spots that both the person who sets the signal and the person who reads it would know. And I had one that was on my route to work, where several signs could be placed, such as a call for a meeting, which was unusual, but it would have been possible. I never met anybody KGB in the territory of the United States. And the most important one was the danger signal. That was a red dot. And it was, when I saw that red dot, it was about the size of my fist. It's the only thing that went through my mind is, oh shit. And then I just, and what that meant really, danger, get out of the country. Just don't pack luggage, go get your reserve documents and make sure that you take cash with you and make your way to Canada. And the plan was to then, getting exfiltrated from Canada. But I didn't do that. I went straight to work. And of course, I was completely non-productive that day. I was a programmer at the time. I was just staring at my computer screen and pretending to work. It didn't work, and my mind was racing. Here's the reason. The KGB did not know this. I had at the time, 18-month-old daughter in the United States, and I really fell in love with this girl, and and nowadays I have an 11-year-old still, and I watched her grow up. I mean, if you watch, in my case, it's little girls. If you watch them grow up, there's no way that you can't love them. And so I had this deep love for her, and I was at least trying to figure out a way to take care of her, because her mother was not. If she had been raised by her mother alone, she would have grown up poor. So, and I had not found a way to do this, to channel money into her mother so she would be able to take care of the kid. And I was just thinking, and so I stalled. And stalling was possible because maybe I was sick, right? Maybe maybe I was sick. So then, but then about a week later, I got my first Morse code shortwave transmission that was a little more explicit. Says, you got to get out of the country, use emergency procedures. We have reason to believe that the FBI is about to arrest you. And I still stalled because the radio could have been broken. I could be in a hospital. One time I actually was not able, and I was supposed to confirm receipt of that message by a signal someplace, and I didn't set the signal. Again, there was precedent. Once I wasn't functional because I had an accident, and for 3 weeks I was silent. I couldn't do anything with regard to telling them what was going on. So they waited long enough until about 3 weeks was over, and then somebody actually came to talk to me very briefly. There was a morning in December. I was standing on the platform of the elevated platform of a subway, the A train. It was quite early. It was maybe 6:30. It was still dark, and there's this short man who comes up to me from my right, very short and dressed in black. You wouldn't pay attention to the guy, except he came so close that he could whisper in my ears, "You got to come home or else you're dead." And that, of course, was the moment where I knew I couldn't stall anymore, because now they knew that I knew. So if I now not leave, that would be very suspicious. This is why is he not following the order? So I had this brilliant idea. I would just tell him that I can't come back because I am infected with HIV/AIDS. And I wrote this, and I put this in a letter in secret writing, which they probably received a couple of weeks thereafter. I knew when they had it, because that's when the daily radio transmission stopped. And at that point, I knew that they knew I had AIDS. And they believed it. They had no reason not to believe it. I mean, because, I was highly regarded. I had a lot of dollar savings in Moscow. I was going home as a conquering hero with a special position in society. I didn't know that nobody knew that the wall would come down a year later. But so they had no reason to think that I made that up. So they told my German family that I was dead, and and never ever checked on me, because there was no reason. They had other things to do. I, of course, didn't know that this was going to work, so I made sure that for about 3 months, I wasn't predictably at a certain spot in a certain location at a certain time. So I would vary the times I would go to work. I would vary which subway station I would go to and so forth. But after 3 months, nothing happened. The FBI really wasn't on me, and the KGB left me alone. So I breathed a sigh of relief and sort of started working on my forgetfulness, which was at one point was pretty successful. At one point, I didn't even remember that I once was a spy.
For like a normal person looking in, if I had the KGB, potentially, they're sometimes not that nice to defectors, either, or I'm not saying you were a defector, but someone who's going against the grain sort of thing. And you've got the FBI. A lot of people keep them up at night. Do you know what I mean? Like going to bed thinking, oh, tomorrow could be the day, because I know where you live.
No. See, this is what people think, and you can't do that. If you think about this all the time, you're going crazy. I lived a high risk life, and I very rarely ever thought about what if. I only prepared to, and my mode of operation was to prepare well enough to prevent the what if, but I did not speculate what would happen if, because there's no good reason to do that. And by the way, that applies to everybody in normal life. Don't speculate about all the bad things that could happen to you, because most likely they will then, because you're living your life in fear, and fear is the worst emotion that you can have to base decisions on.
Did you start enjoying the American lifestyle after so many years there? And if you've got a child and stuff that, was there a turning point? Because I can imagine if you were there like 8, 9 years, you'd start thinking, "Oh, East Germany doesn't seem like a holiday park now, and I'm in this country now. I maybe don't fancy going back."
Okay, the enjoyment, if you want to call it that, started when I had my first professional job. That was like, look, that was the first time that I was able to, do something using my mental abilities. So, in a work sort of setting, I had 5 years of training in the KGB, with the KGB. Then I had 1 year of nothing, just getting the documentation that I needed to go to work, 2 years as the bike messenger, and another 3 years in college. So we're talking about 11 years of, being sort of homeless in terms of work, right?
Yeah.
So and I like programming already in college, and I get to MetLife, and I get to write code, and that was so much fun. And I get to interact with a bunch of other smart people. And within about 3-4 months, I told a friend. He said, I told her, I said, I can't believe they pay me for what I'm doing. So I love this, creating something from nothing. And this would have been better than chemistry. and of course, when you are good at this, and you're passionate about the job, you get tougher assignments. And I got on the call list for night calls. I worked weekends, and I got to a point when I didn't admit it to me openly, but there was a sense that the spy stuff that I had to do got in the way with my real job.
Yeah.
I was on my way of becoming what the KGB wanted me to become, a bona fide American citizen. I hadn't lost my ideology yet. I was still a communist, but it softened. It was softened quite a bit. Maybe I had morphed into sort of a socialist East German patriot. But towards just before the year before I did that resignation thing with the age letter, I actually thought about, one day I'm going to have to leave here. I'm going to miss this. That would not have been enough to stay. What caused me to stay was my daughter. But you see, it was a slow, slippery slope in the wrong direction as far as the KGB was concerned.
Because did you have a wife or a girlfriend back in, was it East Germany?
Yes, I was married. I was married in Germany, and I had a son with this lady.
Did you have any contact with them whatsoever when you were away, or
no? Only on my every 2-year trips to Moscow and Berlin, where I was able to meet them. My German wife knew what I was doing. She married me knowing that I would leave her pretty soon after the wedding. She was quite all right with this. She had determined that, she tried a bunch of other men and none of them measured up. So she figured she could wait what we thought maybe would be 10, 12 years. I didn't leave her for another woman. I left her for a child.
Yeah. Well, it's a weird one. Like you're saying, we thought it'd maybe only be 10, 12 years. Like in today's standards, some women would leave the boyfriend if they worked away for 2 weekends in a month. Do you know what I mean? So like you can see like the different generations sort of thing, 10 or 12 years, that'll be fine. And if she believes in that ideology as well, she'll think it's for the greater good as well.
Yes. And then you rationalize, and she was fully on board with, my communist, ideology. She even said I would move to Moscow with you. So we didn't have a clue. We had no idea what the world was all about. And we didn't have a clue that, 10, 12 years is a hard time to remain faithful if indeed you want to live sort of a normal life as an undercover agent, because the whole idea for me was to become a normal, quote unquote, normal American citizen. And that includes female companionship.
Did it come as a shock when the FBI, obviously, they didn't arrest you, but they appreciate, because that was quite a few years after. Had you stopped checking the envelopes?
Oh, absolutely.
Things like that.
I told you, 3 months after I mailed that letter to Moscow, after 3 months, I decided I'm in the clear. At that point, I destroyed all the spy paraphernalia that I still had. It wasn't a whole lot, and I threw that shortwave radio in the Hudson River, and then I worked on my career and on a family. Within a year, we bought a house in the suburbs. Within another year, we had a son. And so now I was focused on, the American dream, do well with your career, earn more money, get a better house, get a better car, get a second car, get a house with a pool. Oh, it was all good.
When it actually came, did you have no inkling whatsoever? Is that you just totally, because obviously you've been trained in these sort of things, and to come as a total shock to you?
If I was still even the least bit suspicious, I would have maybe had an inkling that something is not right. For instance, I lived in the countryside in Pennsylvania at the time, and there were fundamentally no neighbors except for one house that was only when it bordered on mine. Everything else was wide open. And that house, at one point, I got another set of occupants, and that was the FBI. If I'm suspicious, I'm just like trying to figure out what's going on. Nothing. I was completely like convinced that there's no way that I could ever be found. And I was right, except there was one way that I didn't think of, and that's a defection. And so we had a fellow who one day wound up in one of the Baltic states at the British embassy and told MI6 what he had. And he had a lot. He had a lot of information that he smuggled out of KGB archives over the many years. And amongst that phenomenal amount of information, there was a little bit of a note, not much, that there is a Jack Barsky who was an undercover agent someplace in the Northeast. And so the FBI didn't have much of a problem finding Jack Barsky because there aren't too many of those in the US. And they narrowed it down very quickly because when they checked with Social Security, there was only one Jack Barsky who got his Social Security number quite late. So they knew. And then they spent close to 3 years watching me. Because all they knew was that I was an undercover agent, and they also rightly speculated that I was highly trained because I wasn't, nobody caught me in 19 years. At that point, it was 19 years. And then eventually, when they decided I wasn't active anymore, they introduced themselves, and that was a big surprise.
And that's what I mean, because you never got arrested or anything like that. Because I can imagine you're like a prize asset, because America will want to know as much as they can about the people that are spying on them. And if you cooperated, sort of thing, give them a little bit of information. Is that how it works?
Yes, you are somewhat better educated than most people in that respect. A lot of people ask the question, so why didn't you go to jail? Well, that would have been stupid. I mean, what good do I do the American government, the American people in jail? I would just cost them money. So it is standard procedure for fundamentally all intelligence services. If you catch an enemy agent, you try to turn them, and in my case that wasn't possible. So B, that you try to get as much out of them as you can, and apparently I was still pretty useful with regard to what I was able to tell him. I couldn't, as I said before, I couldn't betray anybody. I had no names. But I could tell him about, methods and operations, and I also did some consulting in some cases, not a lot, but I worked with the FBI as a trusted source for I think about 15 years, until I became a public figure. At that point, I became a private citizen. Yeah, it was a big surprise when this fellow came up to me and says, the FBI, we would like to talk to you. I was, I didn't think, oh shit, but I know now how this works, the physiological situation, it's the fight response. And so in order to flee, your body, your brain sends most of the blood to your legs, right?
Right.
The FBI guy who introduced himself told me later that I went white as a sheet, so all the blood went out of my face.
Did the KGB give you training to say you were still with them and you were still undercover, and an FBI agent approached it? Was there a protocol of say nothing, deny everything, they'll deny you?
While I was still active, if you get arrested, this is what I was told: deny everything. Just like, no, that's not true. I'm not. You insist on who you are. You feed them the cover story. It was pretty elaborate. What I did from birth until I showed up in New York. It was a very elaborate cover story, including, for instance, a chemical factory where I worked for quite some time, and it wasn't provable that I wasn't there because that factory went up in an explosion.
Yeah.
So deny everything. Once you get to a point that when they disclose that they have enough information from a third party that lying doesn't make any sense anymore, they told me then ask for a representative of the East German embassy, and then from then on we'll see what happens. They always promise that no matter what, just hang in there, we'll get you out.
I just didn't know if you watch that many things on spies and things. I thought as soon as you got caught, that was you. They'd just leave you. They'd deny they even knew you, and then you just left to the wolves. But if
that's it. Yeah, actually, they did that too. I mean, the most famous case was just prior to the start of World War II. There was a German journalist he was a communist, but secret communist, by the name of Richard Sorge. who operated in Japan, and he sent reports back to Moscow with regard to what Japan was going to do and not going to do if a war starts. The Japanese caught him, and he told the Japanese, I'm working with the Soviet Union. Stalin denied it. They let him die. There were situations like that. When I was active, the KGB did not operate like that. Anytime when there were people caught, they would do everything they can to get them out. And I met a couple that was treated that way. This was, you may know about this case. There was a couple that went by the name of Peter and Helen Kroger. They were actually Morris and Lana Cohen, who spied in England. I forgot exactly what port. Is there Portland Harbor there someplace? Yeah, I think Portland. There's a Portland you have. And there was some secret submarine research done, and they worked with a Conan Melody who operated as if he were a Australian citizen, and they were caught and spent like 7 or 8 years in jail in England until they were exchanged for somebody. So I had living proof that if I ever get arrested, the KGB would do everything to get me out.
When you started working with the FBI and CIA and things like that, did you look at like your training from Russia and theirs and think they do this better, Russians do this far better? And was there anything like that, or was it all very similar?
Well, I don't know how the FBI trains their people. I don't know in detail, only based on what people told me. As I told you, the training in Moscow for people like me was extremely elaborate, and as best as they could do it. What was missing, the two elements were missing. There was no psychological training whatsoever. I didn't even undergo psych tests, nothing. And the cultural preparation for operating in another country was insufficient. It was pretty bad. Now, this is where the CIA does a much better job. But then again, you got classes of whatever, 20. So you got this one expert that can, tell 20 people what they need to know. If they say that, if they are going to Afghanistan, for instance. So this is a whole different setup. I don't know how the KGB trained their normal agents, the ones that would go on a diplomatic cover. I bet you they were in classes, but I don't know if they got. My training was deficient because they wanted me to do something that they didn't know how to do. Yeah, because I was never trained by a successful ex-undercover illegal, right?
Yeah,
except for the Krogers that were illegals undercover in Britain. But by the time I met them, they were already like a little bit up in years, and they were like sexagenarian children. They were just like really lovely, wonderful people, and they always talked about the past, but they couldn't really train me. I just my relationship with them was to speak a lot of English with people who were Americans, and just gain the confidence of how they were treated by the KGB, that I would be treated the same way.
Is it just like it's unofficially that every country just spies on each country, or is it just mainly certain countries? Because you hear about spies from countries you wouldn't expect from. Is it just an unofficial law that every country is just sort of spying on? And do you think it still goes on as much now, or not as much?
Yeah, there's an unwritten law that all civilized nations would follow. I would exclude at this point Russia and China from that group. The Russians, the Chinese, and obviously countries like North Korea and Iran. I'm talking about civilized Western nations and sort of neutral type nations would not react to after they catch an enemy spy in a way that they need to throw them in jail or execute them. But if there's their own citizens, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Right. We got our traitors, Ames and Hansen are still sitting in jail, and they will die in jail. They didn't get the death penalty. In Russia, you would get the death penalty still. And in China, for sure.
We had that guy in England, I can't think what it's called, Alexander Litvinenko, I'm probably saying that wrong.
Litvinenko.
Yeah, and the official story is someone giving something nuclear, and
yes.
To an outside looking in, I'm not one of these, but that just looks like a real elaborate death. Or is that just what you think happened? Or do you think it's just someone from the West planting it there, so it looks like the Russians have done it on foreign soil, so there's that conflict to create conflict?
No, but that's pretty much undisputed. And the other case, the Skripal case, there's enough evidence now that that was the GRU special unit that tried to kill him. This is about Russia. See, the Russian nation is extremely patriotic.
Yeah.
As a born Russian, you have an attachment to Mother Russia that I couldn't find as strong in the United States, for sure. Not in Germany. I don't know what it is in England. So if you betray your country, that will be punished as severely as possible. And so when they can and when they could, they would go after traitors, even on foreign soil. Now, as you may imagine, these are very complicated operations. There are not too many people who can execute those operations. That's why there aren't too many known cases where somebody was attacked that way. And here's my speculation: if I was born in the Soviet Union, if I was a Russian national, I might not be able to talk to you today. But I didn't betray Russia.
Yeah,
that's huge. That makes a big difference.
So you think, well, probably being born in Germany, you haven't got that. Obviously, not being born in Mother Russia sort of thing, and that they wouldn't be as bothered. Do you think, even though it's been so many years, if you were Russian now, do you still think you'd have one eye over your shoulder?
Yes, and I tell you why. See, when you look at Putin, his the way he operates, he is sly as a fox, and he likes to send messages to the West particularly, but also to his own people. He's very good manipulating his own people, and he's very good playing Western statesmen. He played Donald Trump, and he's playing Biden. So in a situation like that, if I show up in Moscow, an accident can be arranged easily, and that sends a message. See, even after so many years, we can still get you. So that's one of the reasons they assassinate people. It was to send a message to others: don't do it, because we're going to come get you.
Well, Putin was in the KGB, wasn't he? I'm sure. Was Putin in the KGB or something like that, or something to do with it? Or I'm sure he had something to do with it, wasn't it, beforehand, before he got into power? Putin.
Oh, Putin, yeah, he was KGB. I'm sorry. Yeah, he was mid-level. He wasn't really an field agent. He was more of a bureaucrat. That doesn't, that makes him not having been an elite KGB agent. But I tell you what, as far as a head of state, he's unequaled in the history of the last 100 years. The guy has been able to keep power for 20 plus years, even while his country the folks that are living outside of the big cities, they're not seeing any progress in their standard of living. There's still places that don't have electricity. And he is hugely popular. I mean, the elections are somewhat tampered with, but if they were 100% honest, he still would have been elected.
When you're seeing when Trump got elected and it came out that Russian collusion was to do with the voting and things, were you at home just thinking that's just daft, or were you maybe thinking, oh, that could have happened, or did you just think that was just the Clintons and things because they got beat?
Well, I can prove it because at that time my book had just come out and I got interviews on cable television. I was on CNN one Saturday afternoon, sitting in the studio, and it was a good 15 minutes back and forth, and they asked me about Russian collusion, and I told them point blank, you shooting at the wrong target. That grand conspiracy is not possible to keep a secret, and right now we have nothing but speculations. Don't go there. That was an educated guess. But what I was telling them afterwards, I said, listen, what Putin is really after here is to try to divide the country, because if a divided America is not as strong as a united America, that's bottom line. And I knew a little bit about what we call active measures in the business, and that is just like influence, cause havoc in the enemy country, influence them, confuse them, and this is what Putin did, and this is what the Russians still do. And I was 100% right. I mean, now it's been proven that my educated guess was right on the money. It was a hoax, and it did a good job, but it weakened the United States government because our president was constantly under attack.
Yeah. Well, it's like in these lockdowns, we've had the pandemic and stuff. I noticed, I think it was on an Australian program, and they were saying Twitter's deleted over 2 million fake Twitter profiles from China that were promoting lockdowns. So their whole goal was just to promote lockdowns.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And the right now, these active measures, they used to be executed via print media primarily, and maybe radio, television, but now it's all on the internet. And there's I'm pretty well connected with folks in the cybersecurity realm because of my IT background. And there's conservative estimates will say that at least 20% of what you find on Facebook was created in Russia.
Yeah. No,
and the Chinese are now busily imitating. They have a bit more of a cultural issue because they're a little bit behind with regard to Russia. But there's now enough young Chinese people who study in the United States who go back and can advise the folks that create this trouble on the internet how to pretend to be an American online. I'm working with a company, or let me rephrase it. I'm friends with a bunch of folks who work for a company that do the same thing in the United States. They create fake individuals on the internet, and then they make them join groups or create their own groups. And then in this case, we were talking more about criminal investigation, to pretend to be a pretty little girl.
Yeah.
We catch child molesters and stuff like that. It's a jungle out there. So I bet you I have been fooled by somebody who wanted to fool me. You got to be careful, and but it's the internet, the World Wide Web is a dangerous place these days.
Well, I only ever noticed there was a girl I talked to, she does psychology, and there's a unit in the UK apparently where it's fake profiles, and the push, like, just say the government puts them out. all the comments underneath. And if you actually click on the profiles, they've got no friends, they've got one picture on, and if they're on Twitter, they've got no followers. And you think there's 500 of these underneath, all with the same message. And some of them have even copied and pasted the exact same thing. And people have started screenshotting. You think it's a weird world out there, because opinions on the internet now change policies, don't they?
Yes.
And that's what they're trying to do, isn't it? Push an agenda across.
But you see, the more sophisticated false individuals, they have lots of friends, they have attorneys, they have phone numbers, they even have passports. If you really want to get to a point where it is very hard to determine whether that person actually exists, and in extreme cases, if you actually need a human being who's a real walking human being, you can make that individual that you created and attach it to that human being. So there's all kinds of hanky-panky that's possible, and unfortunately, these are weapons now. If they're used by the enemy, you got to use them too.
Yeah. One last question, because I've held you on for ages here. One last question. Just say you were coming to the end of your time with the KGB, and you knew it was coming to the end, and America came in, and just say the FBI caught you as you were still sending your signals out each week and things like that, and they asked you to be kind of a double agent. Is there any bit of you, for the right price, that would have done that? Or would you think, knowing what the KGB is like, you think, no, I'd rather keep my legs?
The only leverage they would have had if I have this child at the time, I didn't join the KGB for money. And even though I was at a point where, I had lost a lot of my communist ideals, and I still considered myself a citizen of East Germany, but I might have cooperated with the Americans if that would have guaranteed a good life for my daughter, but not for money.
No.
I was an accomplished liar, and I did a bunch of things that people got arrested for, but inside I have a great sense of integrity. Okay, so within the false life that I lived, I acted like an honest, trustworthy individual. So that doing something, betraying people for money, I don't think I would have done that.
No. Well, like you say, I just thought I'd ask, because you hear that quite a bit, don't you? Double agents in different countries and things like that. And there's obviously certain different people in different situations as well, isn't it? And if someone's got a gun to your head or a gun to your wife and saying, do this.
Oh yeah. No, this now that gets really tricky. And I don't think the United States does that, but other countries do that. They will torture your wife or your child next door, and then they put pressure on you. That pressure is irresistible. You got to say, okay, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, because they don't glamorize that side of things with James Bond, and you know what I mean. When you see the James Bond film, it's all just fast cars, fast women, martinis, and things like that. But the reality is very different, like you've explained.
So maybe I can end this interview with one of my favorite pronouncements. So I got two things in common with James Bond. It's the initials, JB. And if you look at my children and you look at my 3 wives, I got beautiful women.
That's the main thing, isn't it? But cheers for your time, Jack. You've been absolutely fantastic.